True Crime with Jess Rose. Tuesdays are my request evening. Thursdays are stories that I like to bring to you. I'm also over on the TikTok, which is Jess Rose 5472. Or you can join my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Jess Rose 5472. If you put any requests on there, they get done first. I've lost myself. Oh, you could subscribe. I'd really appreciate that too. Completely forgot myself then. Or just watch. Just watch. That I'd appreciate that just as much as all the rest. So I'm going to begin the story now. It's the Harrowing Leiliana. Oh, bear with me. Leiliana. Oh, I practiced this little girl's name all day. Leiliana. Okay. Okay, so the Harrowing Leiliana Wright story. I'll be fine once I start. It's just I'd practiced it all day, and as soon as I go to say this is what happens. So, okay. Leiliana Wright, she was born on the 22nd of January 2012 in Galveston, Texas. It's an American story. Her mom is Jerry Casada. Her dad, Brian Maker. Okay. Now, I'm also going to mention her maternal grandmother and her paternal grandparents, because their names will be mentioned in the story. So her maternal grandmother, i.e. Jerry's mother, is Adeline, okay? And her paternal grandparents, which is Brian's parents, is Elise and Craig, although it's pronounced, because it's an American story, it's pronounced Craig for some reason. So it's Elise and Craig Clackley, okay? So they're the names I'll bring in during the story, okay? Now, Leiliana was born, it's very sad, she was actually born in prison, okay? Where her mum, we're going to do this right from the beginning, where her mum, Jerry, was serving 6 years for burglary, and at this point, Jerry was 26, okay? She's around 26, 27 at this point. Now, Leiliana was at that point taken in by Brian's parents, which is Elise and Craig, if you remember Clackley that I mentioned, when she was 2 days old. 2 days old, and she's already, born in prison. It's very, very sad. Now, Leiliana, she's a really pretty little girl, really pretty little girl, happy little baby, just the light of a grandparent's life. She really was. Now, as a toddler, she'd sing and she'd dance around the room. It's what she loved to do. Her favourite song was 10 little monkeys sitting on a bed, one rolled over and the other. I think it's that one. I think it would be that one. And she loved that song. She's very, very cute little girl. You can see all the photos online. If you do want to look online, though, there will be other photos on there of her. So just be careful when you're looking. Now, when she was 2, okay, Leiliana was still living with her paternal grandparents. Now, Brian, her dad, I don't know why he couldn't look after her. It's not said why she couldn't live with him. But she was very happy with her grandparents. He did see her. He was very much involved in her life. She just lived with his parents. So she had this whole little support network around her. She was very, very loved. And Elise and Craig would even bring her into the prison, okay, to visit her mum. I just think that's quite, it's amazing of them, really. On occasion, they'd bring her in. They'd also give Jerry, her mum, money to buy what she needed while she was in prison. They do that as well. Now, don't forget, this isn't her mum. Her mum's Adeline. This is his parents. So I just thought that was really, it just, you know, the fact they took Leiliana in and they're helping her, I just think it shows they were just a really kind couple. Now we get to December of 2013, all right, and Liliana's age 1. She's nearly 2, all right, and Jerry has been released from prison, all right. She's out on parole, and she gains custody back of Leiliana. Even though Jerry herself was a known drug addict, she'd just been in prison for burglary, okay? And she'd also, before Leiliana was born, she'd had 2 children, which would have been Leiliana's older siblings, taken off her in 2008. So she'd lost a couple of kids. She was a known drug addict. She was in prison for burglary. And when she comes out, they go, do you know what? Here you go, try again. Here's another one. See if you can do this one okay. I just think, for God's sake. Then we get to October 2014. Now, at this point, Leiliana is 2. And Jerry gives birth to a little boy. Okay. And this was with a boyfriend who was a known violent felon. Okay. Now, at this point, Jerry had allowed Elise and Craig, obviously Leiliana's paternal grandparents, as I've mentioned, she would allow them to visit Leiliana, even though they were the only people she'd known from when she was 2 days old. Now, they were just down to the odd visit. And that was for around the first 6 months after she came out of prison. But then it started to dwindle. And then once she met this boyfriend and had another child, it's like, oh, well, you know, we're going to slow these visits down, which I just think is a disgrace. It's awful. Then we get to the 20th of October, 2014, and CPS were called. Child services basically were called, okay? But they were called regarding Leiliana's little brother, okay? He's only a few days old at this point. And they were called because he was born with drugs in his system, okay? Now, Jerry, it seems, had been taking meth. That was her drug of choice at the moment. And she'd actually been taking meth while she was pregnant with this little boy. You know, what do you call it now when someone changes themselves? You know, this reformed character who's just been given her daughter and gone on to have a son. Just ridiculous, okay? So on the 9th of November 2014, there is another CPS report, okay? This time it's about not only the baby boy, but also Leiliana herself. And what it was is Jerry had been pulled over driving, obviously. And there was meth in the car, and Leiliana was in the car. Now, because she'd been on parole, this meant she had to go back inside. Not for long. I think she was only in a month or so. But Leiliana was taken into emergency custody and then released to Jerry's boyfriend, you know, the violent felon. Okay? And obviously this is the baby's dad. So he now gets a daughter that's not his and his son because his new girlfriend has got caught with meth in the car and violated her parole. It's a whole mess, okay? When Jerry comes out, she then decides to leave this boyfriend, the father of her youngest son, okay? But she goes and moves in with his relatives for a little bit. You know, she's never in anywhere for very long. She's really not, okay? And like I say, this didn't last very long. And Leiliana went back to live with Elise and Craig, her grandparents, where she's happy. She's really happy. I mean, she's only been back with her mum. Where are we? Less than a year. And, you know, she'd already been stopped seeing these people that she would have seen as her parents. That she would have saw them as her parents. She would have. But she goes back to them. And at this point, the couple file to try and gain custody of Leiliana. You know, they've had enough. You know, they're like, this isn't going well. And they fill out an affidavit. And on there it shows Jerry that the fact that she's a meth addict, and you know, and getting caught in the car and all of this sort of stuff, you know, the burglary charges, they put all of it forward. But a lawyer that they had said to them, listen, if you take that into the judge, you know, the affidavit with everything on, you're going to lose what access you have got with that little girl. Because this judge, you'll lose everything. Now, I don't know. Maybe it was one of those judges that, I don't, you know, we do hear about certain judges that only want to give to the mother, only want to give to the father, don't want to give certain rights. I don't know their reasonings behind it, and I certainly don't know the reasons behind why this lawyer would have told them that. But he says, look, just try and sort things out with Jerry out of court. Just try and keep it out of court. Don't know why it was said, but the judge never saw that affidavit. Never saw it, okay? So the judge agreed it could be dealt with out, you know, out of the, out of court. And what Jerry agreed to with Elise and Craig was that they could see Leiliana on the first and the third Saturday of each month, twice a month, from having this girl permanently in their home. But I think at this point they just take what they can get. They just want to see their granddaughter, you know, and the judge signs this off. It's just crazy, it really is. And with that going on, so they get to see Leiliana twice a month, and CPS at this point are visiting Jerry and the kids once a month, okay? So there are people at this point in the kids' lives, all right? So we get to the 23rd of February 2015. At this point, Leiliana's 3, all right? Now, Elise goes to the CPS worker, and she tells them that Leiliana had come for a visit at their house, and she turns up with bruises on her face and a split lip, okay? They obviously took photos of this. And the caseworker speaks to Leiliana over the phone. And Leiliana says, yeah, you know, mommy smacked me in the face and the lips. She's 3. She's 3 years old. And like I say, this was in a phone call. So the CPS worker then visits, okay? And she visits Leiliana at Elise and Craig's home, and Leiliana tells her the same thing, you know, mommy smacked me in the face and the lips. Now, Jerry and Jerry's mum, now remember I mentioned her, Adeline. Now, Jerry's moved in with her mum, and she's living there with Leiliana and the little boy, okay? So they both claim that this didn't happen. They deny what Leiliana says altogether. They says that, no, that's not what happened. She's just a clumsy child. And, you know, she ran into a wall. She ran into a wall, apparently. Just ridiculous. And then a little while later, CPS speak to Leiliana again. And she then says, I ran into a wall. That didn't seem like it was coached at all. No one thought, hang on a minute, she's now back around her mum. And all of a sudden, she's parroting what her mum had said. You know, now I know kids, I know there would be cases out there of kids maybe saying, yeah, this happened and this happened. And, you know, kids have an overactive imagination at the best of times. I know it must be a minefield for you know, a child worker, a social worker, should I say, to decide what's going on. But the marks, a split lip and then look, how, all right, the split lip maybe, but then it just didn't make sense to me, okay? But on the 3rd of April 2015, the investigation's closed, and it's closed with a report of no abuse, okay? So then we get to September 2015. And Jerry and the kids now move in with Jerry's new boyfriend, okay? New boyfriend's called Charles Wayne Pfeiffer, all right? And at this point, I believe he's 36, all right? Now, the home they move into was actually his late grandmother's home, all right? And as for Charles himself, he'd actually had a child removed himself by CPS in 2011, and that child went on to get adopted, okay? So not a good history with him either. And Charles is a drug addict too. You know, just a match made in heaven, really. Now, they stayed there with Charles for a few months, all right? But then they moved back to Adeline's. When I say they, it's Jerry, Leiliana, and her little brother, okay? They moved back to Adeline's, Jerry's mum's. Now, although they no longer live together, i.e. Jerry and Charles, I don't know, it doesn't say why she moved out, what was going on there. Are they still a couple and they're just choosing not to live with each other? It doesn't really elaborate. There's some little hints that it was fighting and stuff, but I haven't got anything definite, so I'm not going to go into that too much. It's not relevant, really, because she moves out, all right? Now, although they no longer live together, Jerry would go over often back to Charles's house, okay, as the couple enjoyed doing heroin together. And obviously she's living with her mum. She can't do that. It's not because she's got kids. It's not because she's got 2 young children. No. She doesn't want mommy to see. Just pathetic. Now we get to January 2016. And little Leiliana's age 4. Okay. Now there's a CPS report done, call to say there was physical and sexual abuse, okay, and neglect by Jerry, okay. So the sexual abuse is said to have been by one of Jerry's relatives, all right. So on the 9th of February 2016, so, you know, nearly a month later, CPS finally get in touch with Jerry over this report. And they, you know, she denies all allegations, as does her mum. No, I don't know what's going on there. There's nothing to see here. I don't know what's going on. But when they are talking to Jerry and see Leiliana, they see that she's got a purple bruise under her left eye, and an old bruise. Like the left one looked quite new, but under her right eye, there's a quite obvious old bruise there as well. And Jerry would say that the old bruise was from a year ago. I don't know about bruises lasting a year, guys. I just don't know about that. Pretty sure they don't. But she says that, yeah, it's from a year ago when Leiliana ran into a table because she's so clumsy. There are photos of these bruises online. This is what I'm saying. If you want to see photos of this beautiful little girl, you can. But like I say, you might come across other photos of her as well, which are really, really sad. All right. Now, she also had a bruise on her hand. And Jerry said that a friend had smacked Leiliana. Turns out the friend was Charles. Charles was the friend she was talking about, okay? So Leiliana also, when the CPS worker's there, she brings up the sexual assault Leiliana does. She's a very bright little girl, and she tries to tell people what's happening. She told them that her mum was hitting her. She's told them, you know, that someone's touching her. And you know what CPS say? Well, they say keep Leiliana away from the family member who's supposedly sexually assaulting her. Keep her away from them. And also stay away from the friend who'd left a bruise on her hand. Like I say, the friend was Charles. The essay, we don't know much further into that. I can't elaborate on that. All I can go is on what I've read and what I've found. And it just says that Leiliana also says that happened, okay? So now we get to the 17th of February 2016. CPS file an affidavit, and what they put on there is to say that the kids should be removed from the home. But then they can't contact Jerry. All of a sudden, they can't get in touch with her. She's not in. I mean, if you want the kids removed from a home because you feel they're in danger, find them. Find the children. Get them out. Okay? So, we get to the 13th of March 2016. Okay? So, it's the early hours. All right? Now, 911's called. Okay? 911's called. And an ambulance. In America, it's like the fire service come out as first responders. They're like the equivalent of just our, you know, the smaller paramedics that can come out and just check you rather than a big ambulance, okay? So they are the first to come to Charles's home, all right? But when they walk in and they see Leiliana for the first time, okay, they see she's not breathing, she's cold, she's limp, she's a beautiful little girl. But they said that her face, it looked like there was like 75% of her face was covered in bruises. Okay. Now her eye is so swollen, she wouldn't have been able to see out of her eye. It says that her eye is so swollen. Obviously it's closed, but they said it had her eye, you know, had her eyes open, she wouldn't have been able to see out of it anyway. It was that swollen. She also had ligature marks on her little wrists. Right. Now, Jerry, mummy dearest, you know, the mum of the year there, she says she fell in the shower. She fell in the shower. Now, Jerry then says, I want to go in the ambulance. All right. And they tell her, no, you're not going in the ambulance. You and him, i.e. Charles, are going to wait here for the police and the investigators because of the state of this little girl in front of them. Now, one of the firefighters, he didn't even wait for a stretcher. He just picked her up. Okay, now I've heard this this firefighter talk about this moment, and he really struggles to get through. He really struggles to get through the words, okay? It's very, very sad to watch him talk about it, but like I say, he doesn't want to wait for a stretcher. He picks her up and he carries her out to the ambulance, and he actually says to his colleagues, you're coming with me. Okay, so the stretcher hadn't even had time to come in. He just rushes out. And him and his colleague leave with the ambulance with little Leilana. Leilania. Leave with her, and leave the fire truck with doors open and everything just in the middle of the road. He was just so upset by what he was seeing. It's very, very sad when you hear him talk about it. Now, when they get to the hospital, the doctors there, they try everything. They really do. They try everything to help little Leilania, but they can't, and they can't save her. Leiliana Wright was pronounced dead, age 4. Just so sad. Now, the autopsy that had been done on Leilania, okay, we'll go back to what was happening at the house at the time, but the autopsy showed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to her head and her abdomen. And it says that she'd either been kicked or punched so hard that the wall of her stomach slammed into her spine. It slammed into us. I didn't even know that was something that could happen. And there was also evidence of sexual assault. Okay. Now, Jerry and Charles, they told police that Leilania had been at a friend's house for 2 days. Now, remember, she'd fell in the shower. Remember, that was what was said. Now they were saying that she'd been at a friend's house for 2 days. A friend's house, look, she's 16. She's 4. And she'd come home with all those bruises. And they thought maybe it was the friend's older sister. They said then she took a shower, and they heard a bang while she was in there. And when they went in, she collapsed in the shower and they called 911. That's their explanation of what these medical professionals have just seen on this child. Okay. Now, Jerry, after she's given this explanation, she then goes up to one of the police officers, one of the investigators that are there, and she says, well, can I talk to you on your own? And he's like, right, okay. And he takes her outside. I believe he takes her into his police car. And she says, right, now I'm going to tell you what really happened. Okay, let's hear it. Let's hear it. Because we know that wasn't true. Okay. So, apparently Leilania had been naughty over the past couple of days. So Jerry was saying, okay. She said she'd been answering her back, and also included in this naughtiness, right, you ready? Included in this naughtiness and how naughty she was being for Jerry, she was being sick and not eating. That was her being naughty and, out of control because she was vomiting and she wouldn't eat. To me, that suggests there's something wrong with your child. Maybe go and get them checked out, maybe. But no, this was her being naughty. Now, there was a text that was seen between Jerry and Charles, and Jerry had actually said about this vomiting of Leilania that she was doing it for attention. She's throwing up for attention. I don't know about you, I mean, everyone in my family knows I always turn into a baby if I'm sick. I mean, vomiting sick. I genuinely do. Feel like I can't breathe and it's all the end of the world. And it's, who would do that for attention? Who would put themselves through that for attention? But this is what, mummy says. So now we're going to go back to 2 days earlier. Okay, this is the 11th of March 2016. During this time where Leilani has been apparently naughty and she's been sick. Okay, so around this is 2 days earlier. Leilani is throwing up 2 days earlier. And this was apparently from a bump on her head. That was from a fall. It was from a fall. She had a bump on her head. Was it? Now, while doing heroin, okay, Charles and Jerry, they would hit her every time she vomited because she was sick. She was attention seeking. So while they was high as kites on heroin, they were beating this child because they believed that she was being sick for attention. Nothing to do that obviously Ronnie has belted her in her head and she was struggling. She needed help. Now she was also beaten, not just with their hands and their feet. She was beaten with a belt and a bamboo stick slash switch. Okay, she's 4 years old, and that's what they were beating her for with. While she's vomiting, while she's really poorly. Okay, now we come to the 12th of March 2016, and this is the day before she dies. Now, she died on the 13th early hours, so this is the day before. Okay, now Jerry goes back to Charles's with both kids. So after this, the day before, when they were beating her for vomiting, she must have brought Leilani and her son back to her mum's. Okay, so now she's brought them back to Charles's, so they could do heroin together again. I still don't get why she moved out to begin with. If she was just going to go back there every day, I don't understand. But then after she'd got her fix, she decided she needed to do some errands for some shopping, whatever it was. Okay, so she takes her son back to her mum's with her, but she leaves Alania there. Why did you leave her there? I'll tell you why she left her there. Because she said she couldn't take her because she was so badly bruised from the beating she's been getting for the past few days. Okay. Now we get to 3:30 p.m. Okay. And Jerry comes back. All right. And she comes back with energy type drink, one of those to replace, the fluids that you've lost from vomiting and stuff, one of those drinks that you can take just to replace all the nutrients that you've lost. Okay. Now when she walked in, Leilani was watching TV, but she was being made to watch it standing up. Okay, so Leilani was very quiet. She was just looking at the TV. I doubt she was actually taking in what was on, because she was stood up. And apparently this was her punishment for getting sick. Okay. Now, Jerry and Charles, so rather than seeing your daughter stood there, quite obviously uncomfortable, quite obviously would not want to be there, being punished because she's being sick, rather than going, right, okay, well, I've come to grab her, I'm gonna take her back. No, Do you want to know what Mummy Dearest does? Her and Charles go in the bathroom to do another hit of heroin. That's what they go and do. And then Jerry decides she needs a nap. She needs a nap after that. But rather than taking a nap there at Charles's, no, she goes back to her mum's. And I don't believe it's because of that. I believe her mum was like, come back, because she'd left her son there. It seems to me that she was very aware of her mum, you know, in the sense of she wouldn't do drugs in the house. You know, she wasn't going to bring Leilani back there when her mum could see her. You know, it seems there was a fear there of her mum in some way, shape or form. But she doesn't take Leilani back, like I say. And then she calls Charles once she's woke up from her nap. And she asks about Leilani, and he's like, yeah, she's fine. And she goes, oh, okay then. So Jerry, along with her little boy and her parents, they all go for a steak dinner. They all go for a nice steak dinner. Nice family meal. I'm sure Leilani would have loved that. But she couldn't eat because someone had really hurt her. Okay. So then at 9 p.m, Jerry puts her son to bed. I've heard it's between 9, I've heard it 9:30, I've heard 10. But I've heard 9 o'clock the most, okay? So at 9 p.m, Jerry puts her son to bed and she returns to Charles's house, okay? And when she walks in, she can't see Leilani, but she doesn't ask about her. She just instead goes straight in, and her and Charles go straight into the bathroom. You know, the best room in the house for them pair. And they, you know, they get their fix of heroin again. Okay? And then, and only then, does she look around and she asks, where's Leilani? Okay. So Charles says, well, she's in the closet. And I've seen the pictures of the living room. And there's a very small closet in the living room. Would just be somewhere to hang coats. Okay? So when Charles opens the closet door, what Jerry said she could see was little Leilania's hands tied behind her back. She's 4. Remember this. Her hands are tied behind her back with some wire. Okay? And then she's tied up to where she's hung where the coats would be. He's hung her in the closet. Oh, God. It basically must have tied her hands behind her back and then tied these belts, like old belts, onto where he's tied them, and then she was hooked onto where they hang the coats up. Of course, she couldn't sit down because she's hung up. And also, Jerry said she had some tied around her stomach as well. She had something tied around her stomach as well. And more bruises. More bruises from even when she'd seen her that afternoon. I just don't know what to say. I just don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I don't know how. How can you do that to a child? Now, Jerry straight away tells him to untie Leilani. Okay. Don't do it yourself. Don't do it yourself. Get him to pull her down. All right. So then Jerry goes into the kitchen to make her a sandwich. All right. Of course, she can't eat it. How can she eat it? How on earth can she eat? She's been throwing up for days. She's been hung up in a closet with her arms wrapped up. She's been beaten. She's been hit with belts and switches, and I'll make you so. I believe it was a peanut butter sandwich. I don't have words. But because she couldn't eat it, Charles gets angry again. Gets angry. Like he hasn't done enough damage. I mean, and like I say, there was more bruises on little Leilani than even what Jerry had seen. So what has he been doing to her in those few hours? So he gets angry again, and he grabs her by the face. All right. He then forces the energy drink, I think it's called Pedialyte, down her throat. All right. Now, Leilani stood there for a second. Obviously, she must have just been, I can't even imagine what this little girl was thinking by this point. Okay. And apparently she was just stood there quite quiet next to her mum. All right. Okay. And then what she does, she tries to run out of the kitchen to the bathroom because she's about to be sick again. Don't know how she must have just been retching at that point. She has to have been. And as she runs, she does actually get sick, but she gets sick in the kitchen. Oh, he's furious. He's absolutely furious. She's got sick on his kitchen floor. He then lifts her up off the floor by her throat, and he slams her into the wall so hard that there's actually a dent in the wall. There's actually a dent left in the wall. He then picks her back up and throws her into the closet in the living room. I just... when she is taken back out of the closet, okay, she'd vomited on herself again. This poor child. So Jerry puts her in the shower. That'll help things. That'll help. That will, you know. She puts her in the shower and she goes to get her some clothes. But there wasn't just Jerry in the bathroom with Leilani. Charles was in there too. So when Jerry leaves to go and get Leilani's clothes, you know, wherever they may have been in the house, she starts to hear Charles in there shouting, and there's banging in the bathroom. He's hung this child up. He's beaten her all day. He's then lifted her by her. She's grabbed her by her face, forced a drink down her throat, to which she's vomited it straight back up onto his kitchen floor, where he's grabbed her by her throat, lifted her into the air, thrown her into the wall, picked her up, thrown her into a cupboard, and he still can't leave her alone. So he's shouting at her in the bathroom, and Jerry hears him say, "Get you some of this," whatever this may have been. So then as Jerry's walking back to the bathroom, she sees Charles walking out of the bathroom, okay? And then when Jerry went in there, Leilani had collapsed in the shower, okay? So then Jerry, she didn't phone 911 straight away though. She gets her out, she dries her, she gets her dressed. And then she's like, let's phone 911 now. Now she's all prepared. She's got her covered up. You know, she can't do anything about the bruises on her face, but she's covered the rest of her up. And Charles is like, don't be silly. She's faking this. We don't need to phone 911. But eventually, even he could see that little Leilani had stopped breathing at this point. And he then calls 911. Okay, I have no words. And whilst both were questioned, Jerry herself, she admits that she would hit Leilani too. Now, don't forget, before she'd even met Charles, I mentioned at the beginning of this story, quite early on into Jerry getting Leiliana back, there was the bruise on her face and the split lip. And little Leiliana saying, "Mommy smacked me in the lip, in the face and on the face and on the lips," if you remember. So Jerry was very much involved in the torture of this child. And she also admits that not only would she smack Leiliana, she'd also hit her with belts and bamboo sticks. So Jerry's charged with felony injury to a child. Charles is also charged with the exact same thing. Okay. Now, while waiting for the trial, Charles does do like a TV interview, like a journalist. His lawyer had advised him against time and time again, quite a few times actually. He was like, "Don't do this." And in the interview, he basically says, "She was my little buddy. I loved her. She was great. We were just, it was Jerry. Jerry used to hit her. And I personally thought she'd be better off back with, Elise and Craig. And I was trying to, navigate that to get Leiliana back with them. But I was trying to hide it from Jerry. Just trying to make out this whole thing was all Jerry. It was ridiculous, and I don't blame his lawyer for telling him not to do it. So we get to July of 2017, and the trials begin. Okay. Now, Jerry herself, much like the story we done the other day, she pleads guilty. Okay. And with the plea deal that she took, she has to testify against Charles. I don't know why these plea deals are always allowed. I don't understand it. Story I did on Thursday. I don't understand why these mums are allowed to do this and plea against when they're very much involved. Not only aware of it, but they're involved. I don't get why these plea deals are allowed. But she takes a plea deal to testify against Charles, and her sentence is 50 years. So a lot more than what was given in the last story, but still, it should have been life, no parole. I've no qualms about saying that. But we get to October of 2018, and it's Charles's trial. Okay, now, he'd not only got the charge of what I'd mentioned earlier, which was the felony injury to a child. The grand jury had also brought in capital murder in with his charges. Okay, so that's what he was going to trial for. Now, the defence didn't bring anybody. Charles didn't testify in his own trial. They didn't bring any defence witnesses. It was just all the prosecution bringing the witnesses. Obviously, Jerry herself, who admitted, she was a heroin addict and she was, high all the time, basically saying she doesn't know what's going on. Where the defence of Charles was like, "Well, look, she's saying she doesn't know. She's saying she doesn't know, what's going on. It was her the whole time." But there was proof and there was witnesses to say, she hadn't been there on that day for most of the time. She was seen when she'd gone for the meal at the steakhouse, the lovely steak dinner they'd gone for. She'd been out running errands, whatever they might have been. She'd been seen by people. There was phone calls that, when she'd phoned Charles's house. After her nap, if you remember, she was there. She was there with that final beating, though. She was there for that. She didn't stop that. She didn't stop that, did she? But, she'd been out earlier on. They'd also brought the firefighter who'd carried little Leiliana Wright, and it's heartbreaking to watch his testimony because he breaks within seconds. within seconds of talking about that moment of having to lift Leilani up rather than wait for the stretcher and wait for, all the equipment to come in. He just picked her up and rushed her, right? And he does get so emotional over it. There's a victim impact statement made by Brian, which is obviously Leilani's dad. Just basically saying, you should have let me have her. He was fuming, this guy was. But the sentence is brought down and Charles is given life, no parole. I don't know. It was Texas. I don't know why we couldn't have got the death penalty for this guy. I don't know why. Certainly deserved. How do you hit a child so hard that the wall of her stomach hits her spine? How is that? How does that happen? And when did that happen? When in all that time period? Is that why she was vomiting? How is that what pain she was in? Did it happen in the bathroom at the last minute? Or had she been coping with that pain for 2-3 days? I just don't know. And again, this guy wasn't in their lives long. Few months. He wasn't in their lives long at all. It's just crazy. The judge himself, he actually says hanging a child in a closet is savage. You should die in a locked closet, but Texas hasn't got that ability or something. He really was brutal. He said he'd never come across this. The poor jury. The photos were brought down by the prosecutor, not the prosecutor, sorry, the pathologist, for them to see the photos of little Leilani. And it was said, it was just heartbreaking. These were awful, awful photos. Now, those aren't the ones that are online, okay? Just the ones that are on there that, she's got a really, really dark black eye in one of the photos, and then other photos, she's bruised. It's just awful. It really is, but just a disgrace. And when the judge has watched all this, seen all this, heard all this, and he happens to just lose, I suppose you could say, professionalism for a split second, because his emotions have got the better of him in anger when he's passed down this sentence. The Judicial Ethics Commission step in and basically reprimand that judge, saying it was very undignified what he'd said. What? Look, I understand they can't jump out with their robe on and grab, if it was Charles, grab Charles by the throat or something. I know they can't do things like that. I understand. But he just says, I hope you should die. You should die in a locked closet. I don't think that should have led to him being reprimanded over it. I really don't. I think it's a fantastic thing that he said it. I wish more judges would be a bit more brutal in cases like this, but it's a shame anyway. Now, of course, the children's services, child services, of course, changes are going to be made, blah, 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 as they always are. But there was one thing that happened that is quite unusual. The caseworker that had been looking after Leilani and her supervisor were both fired, which, I haven't heard that. It's an unusual thing to happen. So I thought, well, good. But, they were just basically saying, we had too many cases and we were overwhelmed and everything else. But regardless, they were fired. Now, so they should be, okay? This should have been dealt with much quicker. Things spotted, a lot earlier. But I do believe that they would have been scapegoated given the fact that this was such a big case. And I felt, although her supervisor was also fired, I do believe that people higher should have also, got in trouble too. But like I say, it's unusual for anything to happen. So, no, there was a vigil done for little Alania with her family and their friends, and apparently there was a very big crowd that was there for her vigil, and they all wore like bright yellow shirts with Justice for Leilania on there, and her dad, her grandparents, just heartbroken, just absolutely heartbroken over it, and her grandparents had really tried. They'd really, really, really tried, right down to trying to adopt her, as quick as once Jerry had got out and they realised this isn't going to end well. They really tried, and I just don't understand why that lawyer told them not to hand that affidavit in. I just don't know. I want to know why. Or was it because he knew that judge was going to throw the book at him and say, right, you can't say them? I've done Ellie Mae Butler, her case, and we know what happened with her grandparents. Very, not a similar case, but with regards to grandparent rights, they got in a lot of trouble, they did, for trying to protect little Ellie Mae. It's a minefield. So, but I'd like to know why he advised them not to. Was that the reason? But yeah, that was the harrowing Leiliana Wright story. Just awful, awful. I only found out about this case probably about a week ago, and just the thought of that little girl hanging in the cupboard, I just think, where's the mentality in that as a grown man? I'm saying the words, and it just doesn't. It's so unbelievable to me. Like, where's your brain when you're doing that to a child? I just don't get it. But thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. I genuinely do. Thank you so much. Like I say, I'm here every Tuesday and Thursday, 8 p.m. Or I'm over on TikTok if you'd like to go over there. But thank you so much again. And I will see you soon. I'm back on Thursday, so I'll see you soon. But take care.